My name's Eric Webb. I'm the VP of Sales for Dataweavers here in North America, and I'm mostly today going to be working behind the scenes. So before I kind of scuttle off and handle the presentation logistics, surveys, comments, and questions, I'd also like to introduce Tony Delgado, and he's going to be our presenter today. Tony's a part of the North American Solution Architect team. He's an experienced professional who's been in the MarTech and operational roles for over 20 years, so several decades now, and has worked not only with Sitecore, but Reflections, which is now part of Sitecore. He's also worked at several other .NET CMS players in our space, and Tony is excited to walk us through the webinar topic today, which is Secure Sitecore, Get Compliant, Secure, and Composable Ready. So again, without further ado, I'll hand things off to Tony, and away you go.
Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate the introduction.
Poll. There we go. And you're off.
All right, wonderful. Can you hear me okay, Eric, everyone?
Yeah.
Okay, just to make sure the audio is working great. Thanks so much for the introduction there, Eric. Just want to walk through a little bit about what we'll cover today. I appreciate all of you answering these questions as you come into the webinar. Appreciate you spending time with us this morning to talk about, kind of how we can make sure Sitecore is compliant for your organization, secure, as well as a little bit of understanding your composable journey going forward, what that means to you. What we'll cover today, just put together a very little light agenda, is really understanding, first we'll talk about what support lifecycle from Sitecore themselves looks like and where maybe you fit in that equation. I know we got a lot of responses, what versions you're running today, considerations to have there. Maybe some frustrations you're having with upgrade. In other words, you might be in the version 9s. What's it mean when you have to go to a higher level? Are there complexities to that? Considerations you might want to have before you go into that upgrade. And then obviously maybe what is the target state you'd like to get to? In our case, we'd like to make sure it's automated, it's secure, it's in the cloud. But what's your target state look like? We can talk a little bit about that, and that'll parlay us into a conversation about what's the roadmap to a composable framework. And again, that's what works for your organization. If it's going, all the way into something that's completely SaaS or something that's a hybrid approach, we'll go ahead and cover that today. All right. So the first thing we just want to talk about is from a Sitecore support lifecycle standpoint. We always get a lot of questions about this, and we really like to kind of point back to Sitecore as to where things are at from a mainstream support, extended support, and sustaining support standpoint. And, some of you out there, I wasn't sure if I saw all the numbers, but right now, version 8, if you're running that, there's a lot of 8.2s that are out there. That's on kind of sustained support. You're probably paying premium, or if you need to have that even in your organization. Version 9 is also starting to become in that extended support phase as well. And that also has a premium cost. So there is kind of even being out of support is a risk to your organization. Even if you've got people who can maintain that platform, you're starting to maybe lose access to capabilities, patches, maybe not the hat fixes that are critical, but updates to features and functionality. And then even if we look on the near-term horizon, there's some companies out there that say, I'm on version 10. Well, actually, version 10, the mainstream support ends at the end of this calendar year. So again, we always want to talk to our customers, and when we bring them on board to get to them to a target version that is fully in mainstream support, so they can get all the product updates, assistance where they need to for tech support, documentation, the patches without kind of any frustrations or additional costs. So just to let you know, there's a lot of value in getting to the latest version. And that kind of leads us to the next slide, which is, not only are getting kind of upgrades of features, but as versions, kind of ascend, when we go from, in this case, just version, the lower 9s, to go up to 10.3, we've added a lot of capabilities in these platforms, specifically in Sitecore XP and XM, where we've added things for, universal tracking on the XDB perspective. We've got email templates that were kind of an advantage if you're using the email automation that was in XP. But just as a more prevalent example, in Sitecore 10.2, you can see that the Next.js support was introduced, and that was working with the Sitecore Halo services that was already out there. That's really needed going forward to have not just a complete composable journey, but those that want to use more leading edge headless delivery, right? Because Next.js has become very, very popular. You've got a lot of front end developers that want to have that multi-channel capability. And again, if you move to 10.3, it becomes a little more in line, both from an API standpoint and capability standpoint, that's on par with some of the SaaS offerings, such as XM Cloud, that's now been introduced. So again, trying to bring our customers, when we work with them, to the latest version is the greatest idea to have, because we'll walk through that a little bit. There's some strife in being on those older versions. Those older versions, have a lot of cost. Even though it works, it runs, there are some risks, right? You may not get the patching, the technical assistance that you want, or you may have to pay a premium for that. The technical community sometimes has moved on, right? Some of those that are out there want to work on the latest and greatest. If it's .NET Core, if they're JavaScript developers, they want to work on frameworks that are really, really modern. That becomes harder from a staffing perspective. And obviously, if you're on a version of a much longer period of time, if you're on like 8.2 or an early version 9, the complexity of those upgrades become a little more, realistic, right? Things get deprecated. Things take longer. You may want to test more. You got to make sure that, even usability has changed among larger generations of versions, even if you're going into some of the earlier version 10s. Again, those are something you want to consider. And also, if you're not at the latest, like a 10.2 or 10.3, you're not really a stepping stone to go to XM Cloud if that's what you want to choose to do, or have a larger composable roadmap, which needs kind of more modern integration methods, those connections, those connectors even that you bought either off the shelf or you've built for homegrown. And when you have an unsupported version, I'll pause here just a minute, is they become long and complicated. And I won't kind of step through all of these, but again, they're going to be complex because you're making a generational jump. You're also, when you do those upgrades, it's a multi-layered approach, right? Even if you do the due diligence of it, you've got to look at your infrastructure. The servers that ran 8.2 might need to be upgraded for you running version 10.3. You might want to start abstracting your code, moving those web config files out of the source, repositories, right? Really getting some separation, not just having them part of the solution. And you want to make sure the configurations are something you can adapt and change very quickly. And also the data. You might have to make some really kind of discriminating decisions, business decisions about how much historical data am I going to bring over? What part of analytics do I want to bring over? How much behavioral data there is perishing over time? In other words, it's great that all this tracking, but over 3-4 years of anonymous data, even known data, is that valuable to us if they haven't returned to the site? And obviously testing as well, as I mentioned before, is, does it work from a code perspective, but also are the users accepting the changes? And right, again, if you make a larger jump, it becomes more complicated, and the learning curve might be a little more steeper. And when we look at that, lastly is, it takes longer. There's a more support risk. Things are more vulnerable. Time can always be your enemy when you're upgrading. And also, there's always that notion, like, if it's just difficult to make the upgrade, why don't we just kind of like tear it down and build something new? That's really, really tempting. We don't believe that's the solution. We want to make sure you're on the latest and greatest platform. And when you part with Dataweavers with the Sitecore ecosystem. Now, again, just talk a little more about these risks. I don't mean to kind of go in something that scares, but there are risks to having an Instacart platform in and of itself. In other words, you may have great firewalls, you may have great perimeter protection, but if you're running like version 8.2 or you're running a 9.1, those code bases have been out for a long time. There could be issues, vulnerabilities. And I know that there's sometimes hotfixes out there, and that's great to make sure that we monitor those things, but you never know if there could be someone lurking that's trying to get into your website or get back into your web servers. That risk is still there, and you have older code base, that becomes the vulnerability. It's not so much the cybersecurity around it that becomes the problem. So just as a kind of a question, a little bit of pause here for the audience. I know Eric likes to have a little bit of dialogue. I know these webinars can be a little bit interesting, but what are your plans for Sitecore the next 12 to 18 months? What are we looking at? And Eric, why don't you put some context around that, how we want to look at that?
So as you can see, we've got another poll that's popped up in front of you. Again, love to get your feedback, get an idea of kind of what everyone's thoughts are of the upcoming year and a half. You're planning to hold tight. You've got an environment that seems to be working, and one of those things where it's why fix what's not broken. Are you looking to upgrade to 10x, some flavor of 10? Are you looking to redesign, redevelop? Again, kind of select all that apply in this regards, because obviously some of them may, more than one might be appropriate for your current plans going forward. So we'll give this just a couple of seconds, get everyone's feedback and input on this before we close things out. And
Hey,
Here
Eric,
we
there
go.
was a note in chat that someone's having a hard time accessing the polls. They don't have permission to view it.
I was going to say the polls should be presenting for you. They should be showing up in front of you. If they're not,
Do you want to have them just put the answer in the chat?
Yeah, maybe that's the best option. So again, for the next 12 to 18 months, are you looking to just kind of hold tight? I'll give you the responses that we've outlined. Hold tight on current version and setup, upgrade to version 10, while maintain on current support or mainstream support, rebuild, redevelop the site. Are you looking to fully build in headless? You're looking to incorporate SaaS components within your Sitecore stack. So some of the componentry that Sitecore has come out with, maybe alternative or third-party tools that you want to plug in, maybe incorporate, maybe transition to XM Cloud, or maybe your plans are to fully rip and replace. Maybe you're looking for alternatives besides Sitecore. But those are the options. But yeah, we'd welcome your feedback if you're not able to see those polls. And we'll go ahead and finish the poll now. There we go. Perfect. All right, Tony.
All right, thanks so much. And certainly, if you guys have any more issues, we'll certainly kind of talk these questions as we move for them. Again, I want to talk about if you're on the latest version, the value you're getting. There are a lot of benefits, and I'll just kind of outline these as well, especially when we're talking about a digital experience platform. And most importantly is the ability to harness those new features. As I said before, there might be some opportunities in the experience editor that you want to utilize. There could be some things in XDB. There could be capabilities in just simply workflows that's been updated. Those are capabilities that maybe weren't in previous versions. But more importantly, as I said before, there could be security concerns we want to have as well. We also want to make sure, and this goes for really lots of softwares, to try to be on the latest version or some mainstream support, is that you're where the vendor is making those investments, right? You're on the basically the roadmap as opposed to something in the past. Even though it runs for you, you want to know the direction they're going and you want to be aligned to it. And also, in the course of Sitecore and CMSs, you want to also be able to have that multi-channel performance that you want to have, whether it's headless, whether you want to do things through API, you want to do things programmatically, not just publishing pages. You want to deploy to all kinds of wearables. We want to make sure on the latest version so that technology is friendly to whatever kind of framework you've built in-house. And also that attracts the best talent, right? So if I'm able to support Next.js, I'm going to get talent out there that wants to work on it, right? If I have something built with .NET Core, I'm going to get talent that wants to work on that. I may not have something if it's an older code-based version. It's really attractive to, the developers that want to work in your organization. And again, one thing about making those steps to composability is that also, and we've been mentioned, as noted by Dave Flanagan at Sitecore, is if you're on 10.3 for Sitecore XM or Sitecore XP, that's the best step to move kind of in parallel where XM Cloud is today, especially from a headless services standpoint, to make sure that code is more and more aligned as things evolve, right? So if you're behind, it's going to be a bigger jump, even if you want to start utilizing some of those SaaS componentry or SaaS CMSs offerings that's coming and be, XM Cloud is constantly being updated. We want to make sure that you're in line with that as we move forward. Again, part of having it supported platform is you're going to have quick and seamless upgrades. You're going to be able to make sure you're always evergreen. You're always on the latest version. Upgrades don't take months to disrupt your business. In other words, you don't have to have outages for a month, right? The architecture is future-proof. You want to make sure you're using maybe the app services versus maybe traditional on-prem solutions. We want to make sure your architecture is future-proof. We make sure your team is focused on the value, right? You don't want to be bogged down in the technical operations when you're really trying to build those digital experiences, right? You want to make them personalized. You want to make that engagement, right? You don't necessarily want all your team to be worried about whether or not the DevOps platform is functioning properly. Dataweavers is going to talk about, Dataweavers is able to bring that automation to your organization. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And also from a secure standpoint, we want to consider all these things is that when you're on the latest version and we have a platform that's completely secure, which Dataweavers can provide for your organization, is you're always patched, you're always upgraded. You have a security posture that's multi-layered depending on what levels of servers you want to protect, VPNs, site-to-site protection. We make sure that you have full DDoS protection. We want to make sure your code is sanitized. It's not going to be something that's going to be at risk. We want to make sure that we produce an environment that has redundancy, right? You've got high availability. You've got a DR that's really hot and ready to go as opposed to something cold. This is something that a secure and compliant platform you want for your organization, you need for your organization. And just an example of what we talk about is someone who was up to date, was on the latest version, wanted to have a secure compliant platform that they're working with. And we'll talk a little bit about a success story here, was a brand name you all recognize, which is Isuzu. And Dataweavers worked with this automotive manufacturer to do just that, right? This is Chris, shows nice for a headshot here. He's a digital marketer at Isuzu, and he came to us and said, my teams have spent a lot of time upgrading Sitecore and maintaining Sitecore. We're using Azure, but we're just doing a lot of operational things that I really would rather than focus on campaigns for launching new vehicles. All of those initiatives. That's what's really important to my brand. That's what's important to my dealerships. That's what's important to my future of my company from a revenue standpoint. And what we did do is when Dataweavers was there, we made sure that they had a fully compliant platform. They had seamless upgrades all around, every part of the year. They were able to go to the latest version, because then at the time, I think they were in the 9s. They're like, I need to get to 10. I need to have the capabilities. Dataweavers was able to make that upgrade very, very easy and seamless for them, rather than having their teams have to focus on that. We also had to align with their digital agency. As you can imagine, a big automotive brand has one agency, if not several, making sure their brand is out there on the market in all the different ways in the ad spaces they have. So we worked with their ad agency and their development agency makes their, what's the experience you want to have? Where do you want to go? What are the capabilities you want on your website? Do you want to configure your vehicles? How do we make sure we have infrastructure behind that to make sure it happens? We want to make sure we separate the management of the site talent. Again, said before, they were spending a lot of time in how the DevOps works, how the pipelines are being configured. But he wanted them to really focus, or have a much larger team focus on making sure that digital experience strategy was foremost for the company. They didn't want to spend a lot of time just operationally on doing that. And so that we can kind of separate the camps out and also separate responsibilities, whether it's to the partner or to Dataweavers. And lastly, we want to make sure that, as a large company, public company, they were continually audited. They need a platform that had understanding of what happened on the site, who accessed the site, how operationally it was being done, and the infrastructure is completely provisioned as code so we can scale appropriately, but that's all tracked and logged. We actually know what's going on. It's not just something set in stone and we don't know what happens. We have to do a lot of archaeology. We have a fully audited operation there for this organization. Again, great jump. And we're able to go live with them, going in, utilizing their Azure instance in 14 days. We're able to partner with their agency, partner with the Isuzu, go in and automate it, make it much more streamlined very, very quickly. Now, obviously, this is a large enterprise organization. We had a little more resources, but we can do this with a lot of organizations to come in, help automate your existing Sitecore implementation and make sure it's secure, up to date, and always evergreen as far as its compliance. And with that, again, just want to pose for another question here, and Eric, help me if they're not seeing the polls. Like, what's your greatest concern to a composable journey today, right? Making this kind of step.
There you go. I know you all thought you got rid of me, but I do have one more question, obviously. So what are the greatest concerns to your composable journey? So again, here too, it's a multi-select poll. Are you facing significant tech debt within your existing environment that you just see is going to be a tremendous challenge or burden to overcome? Are you concerned about the architectural overhaul? Like, where you are today, maybe you're running it on premise, maybe you're running it within a hosting environment. You're not really sure exactly what you need to have in place in order to build out a plug and play infrastructure or composable infrastructure. Maybe it's operational management, or maybe it's an internal team's capabilities and skill set concern, or possibly it's just budget and timing. It obviously can come down to just as simple as that. We haven't budgeted for this. We don't really have the time and resources available to make this lift and shift. But yeah, I'd love to get everyone's thoughts, everyone's feedback on that. But yeah, we'll give it a couple more seconds to get some details from everyone on that. And we'll go ahead and close the poll and let you continue to run with things, Tony.
Thank you. And please go ahead and feel free to keep answering those questions as we move a little bit further. That thing I wanted just to emphasize that's important to have in a Sitecore operation that we found is very valuable and brings improvement to organizations is making sure you have automation. It's really mandatory right now, right? We always think that we like to do things manually, have a lot of supervision, but you want to save time. You want to save effort. And if there's a way we can do things very quickly, especially in operations, automation is going to be key. With Dataweavers, we're able to come to an organization and be able to start automating things such as building the pipelines, the infrastructure and application layer. We can help that quality assurance steps go much faster. We can look at security and make sure that perimeter is taken care of for you. And through the build, development, and build process, we can make sure your code is sanitized. It's matching Helix standards. It's matching, making sure there's no deprecation as it goes into production or whatever instance you want. And we're able to maintain any artifacts that come out of the build. We're able to point to whatever environment you want to go to. If it is staging, if it's a test environment, if it's going to go live, we can make sure these things switch over very, very quickly because we do a blue-green deployment. All of this is automated, but it's done with a foundation of governance. And this automation is really, really important. It really makes things much faster, easier, and you can actually have deployments much more faster than you have maybe sprints today. And the power behind this is you have smaller pieces of deployment, right? You don't have to have large monolithic changes to your implementation. And that's what we want to bring to organizations. And again, once you have this automation, it needs to be secure by design. And by security, we mean all kinds of vulnerabilities, right? These are just some of the risks, but some of the things you have to take in consideration, right? You have to make sure you have hardening practices. You got to make sure your architecture in Azure and Dataweavers and Sitecore has all been taken care of. You make sure you're using the latest and greatest, but you're using best practices that the has set forth. And we want to make sure that we look at OWASP, threats out there. We want to, consider those things. We want to apply 24/7 monitoring. We want to look at your firewall. We want to consider all of these things. I know we have a lot on the screen here, but even if you have standards compliance, right? If you're HIPAA in healthcare, we want to make sure you have PHI integrity, make sure that patient information is secure, whether it's at rest, in transit, the ability of who has access to it. If you're in fintech, you got to make sure there's some money laundering compliance you might have. Again, all of this needs to be within your instance, and Dataweavers can make sure you meet that compliance, and also make sure you meet all of these kind of targets of minimizing vulnerabilities for your organization. And we have a proven battlefield and architecture to be able to do that. And just an example of a real attack that we had with a customer. This is kind of like, where activity was coming in and all of a sudden we had a spike. This was kind of the denial of service attack. And then within the platform itself, we were able to automate within the platform. And that doesn't mean that people weren't notified or there weren't, human involvement to understand it. But the platform was able to detect the attack, understand what ports are affected, what services are affected, and be able to close them up and mitigate it right away. And you can see within it, I think it was under about an hour and a half, we're able to completely mitigate that attack and go back to business as usual. That's the automation. That's the protection that the Dataweavers platform can bring to your organization that normally has to be a manually processed or a manually monitored process. Again, how we do this is through beta-proven architectures. And by that, I mean, we have all kinds of templates. We want to make sure we're multi-region. We've got templates for being global scaled corporations. We want to make sure you're composable ready. We can build out for XM or XP. If you've got ARM templates, we've got Bicep templates, what works for your organization, the way we configure it to make it optimal. We can also ensure if you have headless deployments, that's not just like headless for like web pages, but if you've got RESTful APIs to power mobile applications, we want to make sure you work with Sitecore Edge on that as well. We can make sure that is supported. Hybrid configurations, you have some on-prem, you have some in the cloud. You might have hybrid configuration of something that's in Azure, but you're starting to adopt Sitecore componentry like Sitecore Send, or maybe you're using the CDP. Where is that going to fit in your composable ecosystem? We'll talk about that a little bit later today. What we've also seen is because of architecture and how to scale appropriately in a PaaS environment in Azure, is we can actually create a lot of savings. And by that, we can do making sure things are auto-scaled, but things that we don't use often, whether it's pre-production systems, we can schedule, we can look at how much horsepower is behind that. We can automate all that so your Azure burn is not as much it is when it's up all the time. And that's something we work and partner with our clients to make sure to do. And it's also self-healing, just like the denial of service attacks, things that we see within the application, that are hurting, that are, the health is not ideal. We make sure we monitor that, we fix it. We use even some AI componentry to be able to do that. This is all delivered in the cloud. And within the cloud, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, is working within, in this case, let's say a client's Azure tenancy. And this is just an overall kind of high-level architecture diagram where you've got your maybe EA, you've got a subscription to Azure for your organization, you've got the infrastructure you're entitled to, but we'll be able to come in and help manage the integration layer, the identity layer from a single sign-on standpoint. Now, authentication, we're going to be able to power Azure DevOps, make sure that updates are pushing out to those different instances as necessary. But we're also going to wrap all this in Azure security, such as Azure Front Door. We have application layer monitoring. We're going to make sure that data that you have, whether it's in Sitecore itself or if you've got other repositories of data, whether it's imagery, whether it's just raw data you need to pull in from a blob, we're able to manage that as well. And then we also have continuous monitoring. That's going to be like App Insights that you're familiar with, but other tools to make sure that the overall health of the ecosystem is running smoothly, and that those that are notified, know right away what to do and how to be proactive about it, but also automation that's built in. We're happy to talk about that, what that can do. All of this is part of our Dataweavers operational package that we provide to customers. And if you've got PII information, that's going to be paramount in making sure that security is there. Again, just want to pause here so we can kind of look at this architecture really quickly. And then when we talk about composability, we'll look at some other diagrams and how things kind of come into the fold. So as we look into the journey of composable, that means a lot to different people, right? In other words, is that something meaning I'm using some SaaS components, but I've got an on-prem solution, or I'm doing something in PaaS, but I want to be able to invest in a third-party marketing automation platform, or I want to add site componentry, such as maybe Content Hub, or if I want to use Discover, if I've got some commerce, what does that really mean? And that kind of just another question for our audience here is, where are you on that composable journey or headless journey, if that's part of what you want to do? And Eric, I'll let you kind of monitor the polls there for some more.
Yeah, and obviously, since we're having some with the challenge of seeing the polls, again, feel free to put your responses in the chat window, and we can compile those in with the rest of things. But the question being, where are you with a composable journey and composability and headless journey? Again, it's not currently a consideration, or maybe your organization doesn't quite see the value in it just yet. We would like to move forward with it, but our roadmap is a bit of a work in progress. Or maybe, we've started, we're building out some headless assets. We're working with XM headless services on integrating other services as well. Or we started with XM Cloud and we're building our headless assets and integrations and integrating other services. Or maybe, again, you're fully composable already, headless apps, downstream services across Sitecore SaaS services. And again, you've hooked in all the other providers as well. Or maybe you're not headless, but you're wired into composable services and with your existing Sitecore platform. Or maybe it's none of these. But again, we'd love to get your feedback or your thoughts on that. Just get a gauge on where people are right now. And we'll leave this open just another couple of seconds here as you're reading through those responses. And we'll give it 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. We'll close out the poll. There you go. And Tony, if you want to continue running.
Thanks, appreciate it. And it looks like, yeah, some of our answers are coming. Yeah, it's a kind of a work in progress for a lot of customers and kind of what that journey is. Absolutely. If we kind of look, I don't want to like this kind of like a history lesson, but we kind of look at comparing our traditional, that doesn't mean it's invalid, just traditional DXP where everything's included, like Sitecore XP, or in some cases Sitecore XM. They're a little more monolithic, right? The content delivery is there, the content management is all there. You're storing your assets within the platform itself. Personalization was right out of the box. Some of the marketing automation was actually there as well, right? Email automation. Customer data was also stored there as well, whether it was behavioral data or simply sometimes even things you registered, brought in customer information. All of this was in kind of one platform, which might encompass commerce if you're doing transactions, your site search in one DXP, right? Kind of one larger solution. And in a lot of cases, kind of you deploy updates, it's kind of updating the entire solution. It might be parts of the solution, but you're really updating the whole application. And that sometimes takes larger updates. It's a little more, not so much incremental, it's something more strategic that you have to do. When you move to a composed ecosystem, it kind of becomes different parts that are kind of loosely coupled together, right? You have your content delivery, your content management might be connected to that, but it's decoupled, right? Your site search might be something you bought off the shelf. Your customer data might be from a CDP platform, whether it's Sitecore or another vendor. If you're using commerce, maybe using Salesforce Commerce Cloud in conjunction with Sitecore, that could be an opportunity. Maybe you have a personalization engine of choice that you want to be powering certain recommendations or content that's rendered on a page at a particular time that's still aligning with rules you set up within content management, right? So, but these all work together really, really good. But the challenge, of course, is that there are integrations here, right? They've all got to work, and they've got to work fast. You got to make sure you don't have latency behind them, or at least they're within a level that's acceptable for your business. Maybe every night you have a product feed as to when product master is updated or customer records are updated every so many hours. But again, all that has to be scheduled. That has to be secure, and it also has to be kind of orchestrated overall. Now, with that, then we just outlined some overall challenges we've seen in going composable, adopting Sitecore SaaS solutions is the DevOps, right? How do you manage release not just to one installation of a platform, but to many others? And with a SaaS solution, you obviously have a lot of it taken care of, but maybe a lot of front-end code, how things are looking and feeling, that still needs to be deployed. Are there even content updates you want to push that might have to go to different sections? That kind of fits a little bit into that DevOps story as well. And how do I make sure, even from a headless standpoint, my deploying code that, if it's headless, is everything showing the same content? Is it the latest content, right? How is that making sure that's synchronized appropriately? From a performance standpoint, this includes two things, right? On the page load time, that's critically important from a digital experience standpoint, but even on the back-end services standpoint, making sure the servers are able to handle the volumes that come in. You got to make sure if you have spikes, is it going to be able to, maintain, serviceability that you want, right? We don't want to, go into red and that can't handle all the loads or for that case. And also integrations as things get more and more busy. What happens if integrations fail? Who's notified about them? Who takes care of them? How do we make sure they're, performing at a level they want to be? Those are considerations you have to have when you have all these SaaS solutions connecting together. And whether or not you use Sitecore Connect or you build your own homegrown connections, it's still something important that you have to maintain, monitor, and understand that that's working seamlessly for your ecosystem. You also have to understand from a security standpoint, since things are moving between now componentry, even if they're not from the same vendor, is it secure, right? Is having go out to the public web to be able to make that kind of transport a payload, right? Is it secure? Is it encrypted? Is that being done right? Is the code you built to make your own connector, is that being deprecated as well, right? How do I make sure the entire stack that's working is secure? How do I make sure my line of business is a lot of not only your website interactions, that might be really modern, but maybe if it's powering some back office integrations to an ERP or an older CRM, or maybe another customer record master on the back end, is that secure? Is that behind good firewalls? Is that behind a VPN? Is that working in concert with everything else in your ecosystem? You just have to remember that when you're using lots of componentry that's integrated back and forth one another. And then how is that transition going to happen? Like if I want to go to Composable, do I have to take away that monolithic to make it happen, right? Do I need to just start buying just SaaS solutions? We don't believe that's the case. We have a lot of customers that really like their investment in Sitecore XP. They like the solution. They like how it works. They've developed it in a way that works for your organization, and the performance is fantastic if it's in Azure or if they even still have it on-prem, right? But they want to tip their toes into some of these SaaS components, and how do we really make that work, right? So able to do that, to enable composable architecture, just got some high-level ways that we look at it. is that we build a composable architecture that's like a bento box. And for those of you out there that don't know what that is, and I didn't know first either, it's kind of like the Asian food tray with different pockets for different types of parts of your meal, right? In this case, you might have a large part that's content management, but you have a small part that might be for assets or imagery. Or you might have a larger piece that's important for your market automation. It all fits within that ecosystem, right? But they're all kind of plugged together. We want to make sure we have a framework, and this can be full of different software adapters, connectors that are out there to make sure it's pre-built architecture so things snap together in that operating environment, right? Interoperability is key. I got to make sure my market automation works with my website. My website's taking orders to make sure that then those orders are going back to my ERP, so my customer records are updated, that I have a order history from a customer, about a customer. Again, that's important if all these things are connecting. And then within that framework, we got to make sure that if you want to move forward into another SaaS solution, especially if it's from the CMS part of it, if you want to move to XM Cloud, we give you an iterative strategy to coexist with, if you have XM or FXP and you want to try utilizing XM Cloud now that it's been offered, how do you make a prioritized decision and say, maybe I want some sites to go to XM Cloud, but I'm not ready for my full .com. I want to keep that on Sitecore XP right now because it's very large. I've done a lot of investment in both time and energy on it, but maybe there are some campaigns. There's some business units that really benefit from a SaaS version of XM Cloud. How do we make that decision? And we have a pathway to do that. And lastly, we'll be able to, and Dataweavers is able to do that, but can also use any off the shelf, is using a rendering host for your API, because you're going to utilize Sitecore headless services if you want to go with that direction for the GSS, to be able to give a head to the Sitecore headless services to make sure you deploy to any channel that you want to as well. And that makes everything upgrade ready to any clients that want to start the composable journey. If they want to build connectivity, you want to build delivery of content to different types of endpoints, you're able to do that. Now, the approach we have here at Dataweavers is, especially for those that want to stay on XP for a little bit foreseeable future, but move towards a composable architecture or composable steps, is to look at it in a 3-stage process. Now, the times at the top are just some guidance. It's different for every organization, but we look at kind of the legacy stream first. Like, where are you at right now with XP or XM, right? How do we, as Dataweavers, work with you to upgrade you to the latest version, let's say 10.3, for those solutions, right? Making sure we're on the latest and greatest of that to get not just the feature set, but technologically at the same level that we need to be from the vendor. Then we start identifying, if for so choosing, what componentry from Sitecore or even other off-the-shelf third parties, what do you want to utilize? Do you want to use Sitecore CDP? Do you want to use Sitecore Personalize? Do you want to use Content Hub for your DAM? Are there other things that you'd like to bring from the Sitecore portfolio into the equation that's going to integrate with Sitecore XP today? And how do you make sure that that ecosystem is secure? Now, all along Dataweavers WebOps platform is making sure this happens, and we're working with you to say, okay, we're going to continue using XP. We're going to secure that. We're going to make sure it's the latest and greatest. We're going to make sure APIs out of that function great. But now let's prioritize in a business decision is what other components you'd like to add. And sometimes you have individuals or organizations that have Sitecore XP, they want to go to Sitecore XM and just focus on the content management. We've worked with that strategy as well. And then they add componentry to make sure if they want to personalize, do marketing automation, have a CDP, other things added on to it. In a second step, we're going to work out those personalization goals if that's the strategy of organization. What personas do you have? What profile cards do you have? Things that traditionally were taken care of fully in Sitecore XP, those now need to be duplicated or assigned into, let's say, Sitecore Personalize if you adopt that platform, right? What assets do you have in Sitecore today that maybe we want in a digital asset management solution if it's grown really large? Maybe you need attribution metadata around it, right? Maybe you've got to monitor some more copyright and royalties around that, right? All those images are coming from photographers, and you want to make sure if you're using that in a very up-to-date site, that you're using appropriate content, right? That's legal. And again, as we modernize the stream, we're starting to identify certain sites, maybe one brand, second brand, a third brand that maybe you want to move to XM Cloud and launch on. But it's also utilizing that componentry as well, which is now kind of powering both XM Cloud if you want to start utilizing that, but it's also powering capabilities within Sitecore XP and XM that you've had. Ultimately, if you want to move to XM Cloud as your full SaaS solution from a content engine standpoint, we're going to sunset your old environments. Again, this is just a high-level staged approach. We're going to make sure that it's now being fully powered by XM Cloud, the XM Cloud headless delivery if you want to utilize headless, but we're also starting to adopt personalized CDP, the DAM. All of those components are really adding the greater, richer feature set to XM Cloud that may not have right out of the box, if you will, right? But all along, Sitecore is delivering this experience, but Dataweavers is providing the ecosystem around to make sure all those integrations are secure, making sure all your firewall is maintained, making sure all your CDN and performance is taken care of, making sure everything, all the ecosystem and the connectivity between them is working really, really well. And we'll look at those here on the next couple diagrams in stages, right? And remember, we talked before about a bento box, this great little wireframe to show us. It's kind of capstone by what Dataweavers provide is security ops, performance ops, and DevOps. And now at a high level, you can see DevOps is going to feed into content management, and that's going to be kind of also connected to personalization. If you're commerce and you've got transactions, that could be part of the equation. You may have a headless application. You have lines of business applications that are integrating either through that headless API or other conduits you've built. And it's all going to be having performance around global caching, endpoint security to make sure we deliver that customer experience. Now, if we productize this a little bit, just so it makes a little more sense to our audience here in the webinar, again, we have the capstone of what Dataweavers is providing, but now we'll have, for example, Sitecore XM that you may be utilizing. That might be what you've been running all along. That's going to have content servers, content authoring servers. You're going to have a delivery server that you see in the center of the screen. You're going to have a managed Solar instance, right? And then you also maybe have personalization, maybe within XP. You may be using XDB, those capabilities. So you might be fitting one or two of those camps there on the right side. And you may be a commerce customer as well. That fits in this same kind of ecosystem just the same. As we transition and going through that staged approach, if we're still retaining, and we'll just use XM as an example of that traditional DXP, that's still running in this stage. We're still running, XP really, or XM, if you will, the traditional legacy platform that still has a delivery server. But we've now introduced a headless application. We're now introduced XM Cloud on a certain scale to start powering things, right? We're starting to adopt Sitecore componentry such as Content Hub or their search. We're also, if we made the decision and prioritizing, we're using personalized and CDP. These components are not only powering and adding value to XM Cloud that you've just started to kind of maybe experiment with for certain sites, it's also starting to add value to your XM implementation that you've had all along. So you're now getting familiar with these components and it's powering both of them in this kind of parallel processing stage. And again, from a commerce perspective, maybe using Discover for full page search. You have Order Cloud, taking sure that things are transactionally secure, but it's all being done within kind of, in this case, kind of the customer's Azure tenant. Our headless application, again, in the center where the delivery server and the edge is, that also is powering information back to lines of business APIs that are critically important for organization. And again, just to remind, again, it's completely wrapped in a CDN, a security layer, and this is all delivering for our customer experience. The third stage, and kind of we step a little bit further in here, is now the content engine is really powered by XM Cloud, that fully SaaS solution. But DevOps is having to, when we're in the parallel state beforehand, it's having to do update codes to our XM. It's also having to do front-end code updates to XM Cloud. Now we're able to transition fully over to XM Cloud. We're using Sitecore headless services such as Experience Edge here that's now powering our headless application. And we fully adopted some of those componentry such as the hub, the search, personalized CDP. And these could also be third-party applications as well, not just Sitecore, but they're all fitting within this ecosystem. And you can see on the right side where you kind of have shades of what comes in purple on your screen there is really the SaaS instances of Sitecore products. And then you see where within blue is going to be either in the customer's Azure tenant or going to be kind of within an ecosystem that the customer is responsible for. And see all the lines in between are just high level, and these could be bidirectional as well, how these connections are all working together. And with that, I just want to talk again about Dataweavers subscription. When we come to the organization, we want to provide an automated, deliver it in the cloud, always built-in upgrades, battle-proven architecture, and it's completely secure. But more importantly, it's able to support all of these ecosystems you might want to experiment with. If you're going to be staying on traditional DXP, if you want to parallel process and try a little bit XM Cloud, but you want to utilize some composable feature to that, we're able to support that as well. But our framework, our application, our automation can sustain hybrid approaches. XM Cloud when you want to make that decision. Headless deliveries when you want to make sure you're delivering those multi-channel experiences all together. And what we do here at Dataweavers is, and I know we've kind of had a long webinar of talking through the best case scenario of being most up-to-date, most compliant, most secure, most automated, and then how to make sure it's delivered. Some of the diagrams of going and composability. What we provide as a partner is we love doing all the operational requirements. You know, that's our portion. A lot of agencies and dev shops really hate doing those things that you see, the DevOps integration, the infrastructure maintenance. We can take responsibility for that. We can automate all that. Your team, your digital experience team, your agency would love to really deliver experiences for their customers, have that engagement with their customers. We kind of flip the balance so that you can do things that create business value for organization and minimize the exposure to, you know, having to do with source code control. We just give you tools that you can check in the code. We can automatically promote it to whatever environment you want and never have to worry. That's a partnership we want to provide and deliver. And if you want to learn more about this, we'd love to bring you some information about making that composable journey happen. A lot of this stuff is going to be a little bit familiar that we talked about today, but I'd love for you to download if you want to. And Eric and I would love to engage with you to talk a little bit more about your ecosystem as well. What you're doing today, what you'd like to in your path of composability, or if that's not your path, you want to do something completely unique, we can do that as well through a discovery session. And with that, I'm just going to bring this back to, just so we have a little bit of time, open it for any questions, or if we have any outstanding polls that we want to understand, how do you entertain those?